Well, hello. Thanks for having me. There's a pro tip for you. Always use a over-the-top title for your session, even if it isn't really matching to what it is.
True story.
That's right. So this is a brief talk that I have that goes over some studying that I've done, I guess, or attempted research for the past couple of months, and that is figuring out when an organization does DevOps or tries to improve how it's doing software, to do a lot of the things that we've seen over the past few presentations, or all of them. What happens to the enterprise architect role, or the EA, as lots of people will call it? And I think that comes up a lot. I mean, if you remember the, which talk was it? You were giving it, right? There's sort of like the hierarchy of I don't want to work 28 hours a day of organization that you need to put in place. And typically EAs help out with some of that historically, but it's not really well understood what enterprise architects do in a DevOps world. And just to give away the secret, I don't really have any answers. This presentation is a lot more about eliciting, depending on how you want to say it, people to tell me what they've been experiencing. So don't take much of this too seriously. It's more of here's a problem that we have and we should figure out how to solve it. And I think also the moral of the story, the conclusion also tries to be that it feels like in the DevOps world, we could probably do a better job of figuring out what to do with EAs rather than sticking them off into these mode one projects of sorrow that we seem to want to isolate them in, to make reference to everyone's favorite thing. So just briefly, this is me. I work at Pivotal, if you haven't seen me over at the Pivotal table over there. I work in a group that is called Developer Advocates. I, of course, don't write any code. I just make slides. So I'm the one on the team that does a lot of, you could think of it as management consultant types of things, talking about process and how organizations change, talking with, I guess, enterprise architects and leaders, kind of people who are determining how their organization is running. And I talk with them about how organizations I talk with, who are mostly customer Pivotals nowadays, how they're changing, how they can improve their software. So if you came here for the coding, I have other colleagues who could have done that, but they are not here, so now you're stuck with me. I was an analyst for a couple of years at various firms, a place called 451 Research and another one called RedMonk, and I covered all this stuff, infrastructure software and other things, and I actually live in Austin, Texas, so I worked at Dell. If you live in Austin, you have to work there for at least 2 years. So I work there on corporate strategy and M&A, on cloud and software. It's a fun thing. If you've never worked with M&A people, it's a fun experience to see how they think. And I used to be a software developer a long time ago. I was just reliving some old stories about figuring out the class loader in WebSphere back when I did work with someone earlier this morning, but that was fun. And I also write a monthly column at the Register about DevOps and Agile and stuff like that. If you like to read very acerbic and rude comments from people who don't know how to spell words like color, I would recommend the comment sections of the columns that are right there. And I do a lot of podcasts if you're interested in my yammering about things. So, you know, as my buddy Andrew Schaefer once said, engage with my brand. There you go. And if you want these slides, and I have a lot of references and footnotes at the end. If you go to my Twitter account, if I succeeded correctly, I just posted a link to these slides there so you can get a copy of them if you like to collect such things. Put them in a directory that one day you aspire to actually look through, but you never actually read again, and just store them off in the cloud somewhere. So first of all, with the title like architecture in it, just to be definitional, I'm not really going to talk about metaphorically. It's tragic in IT, we love metaphors so much, but like metaphorically, there's a type of architecture that I would call more design, right? The design of your code and how you lay it out, how you make subcomponents and things like that. Maybe the font you choose and how you indent, things like that. And design like that, I think in a DevOps world, that still exists, hopefully. Like hopefully you plan out how you're going to arrange your code and the various parts of it. I guess you could have emergent design, and you could see what that looks like, maybe like a glorpy pile of mush at the end of the day. But that kind of design seems fine and is well understood. More of what I'm interested in here is, metaphorically speaking, sort of like city design, right? Like this is kind of an overview of Auckland, and when they look at all of the various things they have to plan for. Like what enterprise architects are more concerned with is all of these various components of various ages, the needs the stakeholders have in this city, again, being tragically metaphoric, and figuring out how it all fits together, and hopefully making sure, you know, it doesn't blow up and they have clean water and sewage and other basic things like that. So that kind of thing applied to a large software portfolio in a large organization does seem to be something that requires an extra role. And again, in the DevOps world, we're not always so great at figuring out how to address that. Although the talk yesterday kind of ruined my point here, because there was a lot of thinking about how we fit it into a large organization. So that was nice. But so first of all, let's look at like what an enterprise architecture is. Kind of when I talk about a large organization that's complicated and you have to manage it. This is excerpted, there's a company back in the States called Comcast. They also own NBC, so you might be familiar with them in that area. And this is a big application that they have that basically manages the delivery of their cable TV and internet. And, you know, it's got their main website and it's got doing sales. And I think the ESP is like the core system for figuring out, like hooking up customers and making sure they get delivery. And then you've got people calling to a call center and customer care. I mean, just think about various businesses that you've encountered, and it's got all these various components. Now, this is actually several applications, right? And you can see some impressive stats that should just make you think, wow, that's big over there, right? And managing this kind of thing is difficult on its own, and you can kind of wrap your head around how, I don't know, like some DevOpsy teams could sort this out and coordinate with each other. But then, of course, you get in a larger organization, and it's not only one of those things they have to manage. You know, they might have like 6 of these types of applications, especially in holding companies and across businesses that they have. And then you get to even bigger ones, and I forgot to count how many there are here. But you can think about how that kind of complex application, especially at, you know, pretty global companies, banks, insurance companies, and especially government institutions, they start to be these huge portfolios of applications to manage. And somehow, you know, you don't want our friend over here to have to figure out how to work 28 hours a day. You've got to somehow manage that and make sure that all of the technical concerns, all of the architectural concerns, for lack of a better word, are coordinated, that you're not duplicating the way everything's done here because you're overspending, that you have all the governance and compliance and regulations that you meet with. And it probably would also be good if you make good technology selections, but that's usually way far down the list of satisfying the needs at a corporate level. So if we're thinking about how to apply DevOps and other kind of improving software things to a situation like this, traditionally we have, and you know, we're at a DevOps conference, so everyone knows the siloed organization. You know, traditionally when you have such a big thing, you're optimizing by specializing, and you divide the roles out, and you have an organization that looks kind of like this. And when you have all of your functionality strafed out across various silos, you need some coordination across that, right? And hence, we often have enterprise architects of various types. You often hear about solution architects and application architects, which sounds like the people in HR like got to go crazy with title ladders and things like that. Everyone always complains there's no technical track in tech, so I guess that's what we get. Anyway. Oh, the battery's dead. I'll just keep talking while it gets replaced.
A second.
Sure. I'll pause my... Okay. So you got 2 microphones. Lots of architecture going on there. All right. So I think that's often why you end up with this kind of organization, is if you remember the 30 or plus applications and you strafe things out, you need someone to coordinate all of that and make sure it's working well. Now what this often results in, and this is a great presentation if you haven't seen this down here, is, you know, we had all of these, we have to govern all of this, and we used to be able to operate quickly. We could move around like a speedboat. But now, over the years, over the decades, we end up with this paddle boat sort of thing. I guess this is kind of from the Mark Twain era. I know y'all have all sorts of cruise lines over here, but you know, it's kind of a lot like what you get on what we would call a booze cruise, where you go out with your coworkers and there's a bunch of free drinks, and that sounds really awesome. And then you've had like your 3rd drink, and then you're like, holy crap, there's 3 more hours of this, and I'm stuck on a boat. Right? And that's a lot of what like enterprise governance ends up looking at. Like after a while, you're stuck on this boat, you can't change it, it's very slow moving. And then there's other artifacts that you might have seen of enterprise architecture, right? Like this is one of my favorite quotes about enterprise architecture. It's very, very understated about all of the stuff that comes up. You know, you've got your reference library of what your governance are. It explains how the business functions. You just got reams and reams of paper. As Martin Fowler called it a long time ago, it's like the almighty thud, like big old thick things explaining how everything works. And you know, that's lovely. And then also you have these enterprise architecture diagrams. These are two kind of older ones, but this is for Delta Airlines, kind of like the big diagram of how Delta worked in the mid-2000s. And this is for ING. This is back before, long before Capital One bought the, at least the sort of American assets of them. But, you know, you get a sense of like, this is the map of how everything is laid out. And therefore it helps us organize and think about how we do our IT. And these are actually really good diagrams. Like you could study these for a while and they're kind of fun, especially the airline one, because most everyone flies. I guess everyone banks too, but it's kind of easier to see how airline things work out. So these are kind of like the tracers, and I'm giving really short shrift to what enterprise architecture does, but you've probably seen those kinds of diagrams and those big old stacks of paper and that kind of governance. And then we have the world of DevOps, where you've got this problem. So this is someone who works at a American multi-state health insurance provider. And they've moved to this point, to kind of a very DevOps point, where they, as he says here, they deploy multiple times a week, right? 8 or 15 times. And, you know, just to spell out the quote, like, how are we going to how are we going to engage with enterprise architects? How would we even have time in a week to schedule that meeting? Like, I don't know if you've ever tried to schedule a meeting with an enterprise architect or anyone with such a fancy term, but they're probably busy for the next 2 months. And then they'll finally show up at the meeting and like their kid's sick, so they couldn't attend, and then you've got to reschedule. And meanwhile, you're trying to deploy your build and it's just not taking a while, right? So clearly the way that enterprise architects interact with their function, with governing, needs to change if you're deploying your code that frequently. And we'll just take it for granted that it's a good idea to deploy your code that frequently, and there's positive effects to it. I mean, that could be a whole other discussion that we would have. So to kind of figure out what at least I've seen so far when talking with large organizations about what enterprise architects do, how they can remain relevant and helpful, how they can thrive even, the first thing is you see kind of this pattern of the organization that gets set up. So to very quickly go over it, if you remember the siloed organization, right, where we had each of the different functional groups that would sort of pass a project along and work on it, and if you know all of your lean and your gold rad and your DevOps handbooky stuff, right, they're all locally optimizing on delivering their one little part instead of paying attention to the whole and making sure it all fits together. So instead, organizations we work with and many DevOps ones, I mean, they have the literal DevOps portmanteau, however you say that, and they end up having teams that are focused on just that product, fully dedicated to whatever piece of software they're working on. And they also notably embed business people in there who know actually what the business is, and you don't have to spend a lot of time as a role taking requirements from the business to the product team and explaining it. Instead, you do the old XP thing of just having them on the team. So you've got all these autonomous operating teams who are just like fantastic, just operating on their own. So clearly some of the function that an enterprise architect does moves down to that team, right? And in fact, you see a little bit where enterprise architects will go on that team for several weeks, if not longer, and actually work with them to make sure that they're following all the practices. Now, there's also, as we'll get into, a bunch of legacy stuff. And to be frank, I forgot what this stands for, so I'm not going to talk about it. But underneath it, you often have a platform team, right? So it's probably a good idea, I don't know, unless you have a lot of spare time, that each of these teams, and imagine, you know, like 10, 20, 50 of these teams, don't completely architect the stack of software and build the stack of software that runs their application. I mean, again, like maybe you want to have 50, 60 different ways of doing that, but people tend to standardize on one platform that they're running on, right? So they just focus on the applications that they're deploying to. And so there's another interesting thing we'll get to where the enterprise architect seems to take a pretty large role in that platform, because if you think about it, that's defining what the enterprise architecture is to a large extent. And then also, there's still an oversight role, which I think gets to be a little bit underappreciated by people who focus on the awesomeness of like figuring out how to do arcane networking discovery in Docker and AWS. Like you spend all your time down here doing that, but someone's kind of like got to mind the whole picture over here to make sure it's working out. So let's look at what, at least so far, like I was saying earlier, what I'm seeing enterprise architects can be helpful with in such a situation. Excuse me. So first of all, let me get a drink of water here. First of all, so this is one of the, as far as I read on the Wikipedia page, one of the original Toyota Looms. And so this is a good start to talk about strategy and what enterprise architects do. So probably if you're here, you've read about how awesome, like whether it's uppercase or lowercase, lean manufacturing is, and how you move the knowledgeable workers as close to the thing as possible, and you're making awesome cars and stuff like that. And lean is fantastic, but at the team level. But what I think is interesting is to, way back in the history of Toyota, before they made cars, they made looms, and to make the looms work better, they figured out all this fancy lean stuff ongoing. But I always wondered, like, well, who decided to make looms? Like, who sat down and said, well, what we should do is make looms, never mind Andon cords and all of that stuff. Like, how do we decide that? And then later on, how do we decide to make cars? Like, is there a lean process for figuring out what your strategy is and what capabilities you have, and figuring out if you can do that really well? And I don't know. I mean, I once asked a lean professor I saw a talk on, and there didn't seem to be a great answer. I mean, I think the one of the Toyota descendants who decided to make cars, he just thought cars were awesome, so they started making that. And maybe someone thought looms were awesome. But it does seem like an enterprise architect, maybe they don't have a full role in deciding what the strategy of a company is. But hopefully, and for probably many people in this room, this is maybe a little taken too much for granted, but hopefully an enterprise architect knows technology, and they also know how the business operates, what their goals are, and they can help map those two together and say, so metaphorically speaking, if we want to make looms, and we know how to do DevOps really well, then here's a way that we can pursue our loom business or a car business, or I don't know, our business of booking cabs or selling insurance or whatever it is you do. You would expect an enterprise architect type to sit down with the strategy people who don't really know computers very well and kind of help inform them about what's actually possible, right? Like, to use an absurd example, like if we wanted to have a car booking service, we can't yet send a car to the moon or Mars, so we should probably not bake that into our strategy. Now, again, that's a ridiculous one, but what you would want an EA to help out with is how do we decompose like grandiose strategies and visions all the way down to an actual backlog that we give to those teams as features to do. And again, an individual autonomous team out of 50 or 60 teams, it's not really their responsibility to boil that ocean down to their team. They need some people helping them do that have some technical know-how behind them. So again, fitting into the overall organization or corporate strategy efforts seems like something that you still want to happen, that enterprise architects should still be doing. And indeed, as an example, so this is an example from one of the larger like pension funds out there that thus becomes one of the larger investors globally. This is from the Ontario Teachers Union. You can see over like 20 years, there was a lot of guidance given about how they upgraded their portfolio of software, right? They started off with Smalltalk, which is always exciting. And then because they knew how what the strategy of the company was and how it wanted to evolve, they were able to pick these different technologies and evolve the stack on and on and on, right? And who knows if the EAs were there during that whole 20-year time, but being able to make those kind of selections across the company is something that it seems like you need an enterprise architect to help out with over time. It would have been better if I had actual business stuff on this, but you got all this anyways. So then the next thing that it seems like EA should help out with, right? So all this DevOps stuff is well and good, right? It's all fine. But someone has to go and help and tell the rest of the organization, like, now you're going to be completely autonomous teams that can decide exactly what you do all week, and you get to make your own backlog, and we're not going to have a lot of people telling you what to do. Now, of course, if you're a developer or an operations person, anytime someone higher up tells you what to do, you immediately think they're wrong. So probably even with that proposition, you're going to have kind of like this reaction is like, don't tell me that I should have more freedom. That's terrible, right? Like, you have no idea what you're talking about. So again, given the kind of looking over everything and hopefully the long history that an enterprise architect has with an organization, as you look across the organization and try to find teams and people who can start doing things in a DevOps-oriented way, hopefully they can be knowledgeable at saying like, all right, out of the 20 teams that we have, I think that this team over here should be one of the first people to switch over to this. Like they've got the right kind of maverick mindset where they'll try out new things and they'll take risks. And then if I go over there to like my AS400 team, we'll probably put them kind of on the last set of people who will switch over, which maybe that's unfavorable to old System I people. But you want to be able to sort out the groups and the applications you have that you actually apply these new techniques to. And then ongoing, other than having like a bunch of I guess they still call them coaches, like agile coaches running around and stuff like that, you probably want some EA people to feed into this process of changing over what your process is and helping out with that. So that seems like another role that is very useful for an enterprise architect to start doing, that allows them to keep helping out their organization. And also some funny clip art to use. So then, I don't know if you recognize this from your work, but this is legacy. All of your legacy IT stuff. And I think if you stare long enough, you'll see one of those like long-haired Japanese girls who's a ghost that will eat your face if you stare at her too long down there. But let's think about our DevOps team, right? Does anyone here want to manage legacy? Is that really something that you want to do? Probably not. It might be stable and kind of easy, but anyways. So you've got all this legacy stuff you need to manage, and there's all sorts of ways and methodologies to figure out what to do with legacy. And the two core things that you need to have kind of an enterprise architect strategic view for are one, it'd be good to know what your portfolio of legacy is. And two, you want to know, so which of this stuff should we leave alone? What stuff is too risky to touch that doesn't have enough payoff to messing with it? And then three, so of the stuff that's left over, what do we just wrap an API around? Or I think someone brought up the strangler pattern around here. What do we wrap an API around and kind of hide? And then what do we quickly or slowly evolve to rewrite or update the legacy code that we have? And, again, individual teams that are operating are not really the best to look at that whole portfolio and make those decisions. And so you do likely need will do better if you have some kind of oversight role like an enterprise architect to help you sort through this dark hallway of stuff, right? So that's something, again, that comes up over and over again, is figuring out how we plan out what we're going to do with all of our legacy systems versus our brand new, as people would say, greenfield systems. So then, speaking of new systems, so you got microservices. I don't think you remember this slide from like 3 years ago when microservices were brand new? Every time a new technology comes around, people really bathe in glory in how complicated it is. It's sort of like they think it's awesome to have these giant balls of complicatedness, which to a certain extent is true, right? Every time you figure out a really wicked debugging problem, it seems like you're really doing excellent work. And so you're kind of building yourself up to have more of those challenges. But when you think about, as people are doing microservices and writing their new code, they've got all these different interacting components, right? A lot of what makes DevOps and new ways of doing software possible is you're breaking your components down into very, very small components, right? I remember one of the early definitions of sizing a microservice is that if you went to a standard issue corporate monitor, the code should be as tall as your head. Now, it didn't say what font that was going to be in or anything like that, but it's a good rule of thumb. So if you think about breaking your system into a bunch of head-sized chunks of code, that's a lot of code you're going to have coordinating together, right? And likely, you're going to want someone to help you manage, at least deduplicate what's going on there. Now, there's a weird line to walk that I don't think we quite know with microservices about how much oversight you want and control, because we don't want it to turn into like a WS Death Star or SOA kind of mess. But at some point, for example, you probably don't want to have 8 or 10 different single sign-on services, right? It's sort of right there in the name that you probably want as few of those as possible. And, once you figured out whatever, bounded context are and all of that voodoo, you probably are only going to have a handful of customers and records of what they've bought. And if you allow each autonomous team to figure that out, you'll probably end up more over there with a bunch of duplicative things and stuff that it's not only inefficient to run, but if you think about the more duplicative services that you have, the more duplicates of a service you have, the longer it will take to use them, because you'll sit down and be like, here are 40 customer representations of 40 customers. I need to go understand each and every one of them to figure out which 3 I should be using, right? So in order to keep speeding up the process, you don't want to have too much involved that you need to go out and look for. So anyhow, this comes up frequently, that likely what an enterprise architect also helps with is, as you evolve your big old ball of microservices, you need some kind of insight to make sure that it's not going too crazy, and to help out with that. And then you pipe in hooking up with legacy systems and third parties and things like that. And there's probably some consultative role that they need to take to make sure that the sewage pipes in your city don't blow up too bad. So next, I mentioned platforms, right? Like most organizations that I talk with, when they have all of these various teams, they try to consolidate as much as possible on one platform, right? One way of deploying their software, one way of managing it in production. Many of the advanced ones, or at least in my view advanced, they tend to have one type of doing a build, one way of doing a build pipeline. And they don't have a limited set, but they have a set of middleware, of databases and queues and other things that they use. And they try to consolidate down as much as possible so that people don't spend time figuring out how to troubleshoot weird DNS and networking issues or how they should package their applications up. And instead, they just focus on the application that they want to develop. And so it seems like in selecting and choosing that, enterprise architects also have a huge role to play, right? In fact, maybe a leading role, which I actually don't see them doing very much, in thinking this is the platform that we should have for doing new application development that will give us all the great DevOpsy agility stuff. And they should probably be testing that out and making sure that it'll fit in and satisfy what their organizations need. Right now, a lot of that is done, oddly enough, from all the way on the top at the CIO level who will mandate a platform like this used. Everyone loves it when someone with a C in their title mandates something. Or at the bottom where you have individual developers doing a bottoms-up way of doing it. But there in the middle, there's not much minding the store as far as what technologies we should be using. So that brings us back down to here, right? So if you think about that platform, right, you're building, it's the implementation, to use object-oriented terms, of the abstract idea of enterprise architecture, right? So you build in, like all of the governance and enforcement, the things that an enterprise architect would want to build rules around, that old paddle boat, if you remember it, and you actually have it in the platform, right? And a lot of what that does is it makes it very easy to do the right thing instead of having people build it up, right? Like if you remember some of the inspect talk this morning, right? You're automating a lot of things that used to be manual, and you're making a platform for compliance to some extent. And think about how that would apply to all of your development, your operations, and things like that, and you have a platform. And then I think metaphorically, the way to think about that is, I don't know if all the enterprise architects move down to doing this, but they have a product. And so in the same way in a DevOps world, we would expect the people working on the product to support it, right? To have skin in the game. When they make these enterprise architects make decrees about how things should be governed and the cycles that they should do, they should be responsible for it as well. So you have the metaphoric pager carrying, right? Where if they're actually running that product and they're product managing it, they likely will make it a better enterprise architecture for their organization to use. So, I think one of the things that runs through all of this that often comes up about enterprise architects is that it's probably a good idea for them to be really knowledgeable about the latest best and worst practices, right? Now, not all enterprise architects, just like myself, have time to actually code, but when I talk to the ones that are really good, they actually do spend some time POC, testing out and demoing things that they're recommending, right? They maybe don't spend a lot of time coding, but they spend enough time to keep up with how things are actually operating. And that not only gives them credibility with people they're trying to police and enforce, but it also allows them to make good recommendations that actually work out for their company. So it's not always possible for an enterprise architect to actually know what they're doing, but it's probably a good idea for them to get more involved in the actual day-to-day coding and operating and things like that, which is a good reason for them to take little journeys down to the actual product teams. And in most people who I talk with nowadays, they do pair programming and pair opping, and they pair on all those roles. So even if an enterprise architect's a little behind, you can just pair with someone who's more knowledgeable. And if you're not really arrogant and you think that's terrible, then you can get dragged along intellectually by someone who can help you out. So that's the talk. There's a couple minutes left over for questions, but thanks again for having me. And if I'm really interested to hear the reaction to this, and if you've encountered enterprise architect-like roles in the DevOps world, because like I said, I don't really know what the answers are, but I get asked this a lot, and there's really not that much written down about it. And there's how you can follow up and things like that, and also Pivotal's always hiring. If you want to use that little thing down there, you can feel free to come talk to me about that. I have a bunch of stickers that weigh a lot, so you should come take them. So I don't.
You represent Pivotal, right?
Sure.
Maybe you can have 1 minute in the name of Pivotal as well.
Oh, sure. Do I use this microphone? I'll be in stereo.
Yeah, you can stereo.
All right. Well, if you remember from yesterday. So I took this crass commercialism out, but hey, since it's my 1 minute pitch, we'll go to this slide. So this is the platform that we have that I was talking about, and it basically wraps up all of the middleware operations, your container orchestration. We have something that's coming out at the end of the year that'll run stock vanilla Kubernetes from you that we partner with Google around. And yeah, this is an example of a platform that a lot of organizations use as their centralized place to run all of their applications. And I can tell you more about that out there. I'll go back to this microphone now.
Thank you, Pivotal.
Hold on, let me remove this commercialism.
Yeah.
I don't want to infect our brains.
Well, do we have questions? Come on, people.
That's all right. Mass confusion is a common result to me opening my mouth, so that's fine.
All right, if no questions, of course, everyone's available in the breaks and lunch, which we'll have shortly, but we have not yet. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And as